Well, good morning, everybody. Here's what I got planned for you today on Tuesday morning. We're going to walk through what the potential risks could be if the pattern does not slow down. In other words, it continues to stay wet. So one of the things I want to look at here in just a few moments is the accumulation of GDDs if we don't plan until the very end of May or the beginning of June. We're going to look at that specifically in the Midwestern part of the United States where the questions have come from. I'm going to walk you through what I think the pattern is going to be doing for the next 10 to 15 days, and then we're going to get into that longer range discussion. Again, I want to talk about 2020 again, and I'm going to talk about some of the trends in the longer range models and then give you a bit of an update on some international weather as well. So that's where we're going. All right, the image you're looking at right now, this is the current satellite as the sun is trying to rise this morning. We get a new image in about 15 seconds, as you can see down here. But what I'm thinking about is the precipitation that's coming from this low. And remember, this low is the one that began the weekend over Arizona and has moved out into the central part of the United States. It's a slow mover, not a lot of flow, shoving it farther to the east, which is why it's sitting here and spinning. And there's that new image. But you can see this morning as the sun rises, still more cloud cover and rain in this area. Yesterday, very intense convection across the Gulf Coast, and even this morning, see the storms popping right here in this part of southern Georgia into Florida. But if I take you back to yesterday, we can see all of those large storm complexes rolling across the Gulf Coast. You can see the embedded thunderstorms in the circulation that's to the north here over the Midwest. But I wanted to show you two other things. This is wildfire smoke on the back side of this low getting pulled in and wrapped around. This is from like northern Alberta. And then there was some very intense convection that popped off and throughout the western mountains yesterday as well, including, watch right here in the Snake River Valley, these storms that blew up right in this area. A lot of wind out of these, and we can take a look at those storm reports from yesterday. And there you can see those wind reports that were in part of the Snake River Valley, some in Montana, a few throughout the Midwest, but all along the Gulf Coast. That was where we were keeping an eye on our most intense convection. All right, in terms of total precipitation, though, this is where the concern comes in for a lot of Midwestern growers. Now, up in the Dakotas, things were a little drier, but the farther south you went, the greater the chances were that we had rain coming in, and it didn't take much. Any moisture that came into this area was enough to, to take us out of the fields and stop any sort of work that had been going on. And we're concerned about the next few rounds of rain coming through, just pushing back that final planting push. And I'm sure a lot of you saw the planting progress numbers yesterday and are just kind of wondering how the end of this is going to finish out. We've talked a lot about these flooding rains across the south. And again, this part of Texas here, some places are already receiving their entire year's worth of rain just in the first 4 months of the new year as we begin this fifth month here. Okay, from here, let's take a look at what our soil moisture looks like. I'm going to look at the top soil. This is the top 4 inches looking at percentile. And when we see such a huge area of land in here, back into Montana now because of last week's heavy rains, this part of Colorado getting into New Mexico, this whole region in through here, just seeing numbers that are in this 90 to 98%. This is, again, a percentile, not a percent, a percentile. Just shows you where we stand kind of as a rank. And speaking of ranks, I would like to show you the current rank starting on April 1st going through May 13th, looking at total precipitation ranks. And we kind of stressed this a bit yesterday, but what's happened over the last month and a half is that those big drought areas have been eaten away. And we not to ignore them. I mean, we have been drier in the Columbia Basin. We've been drier in pockets throughout the Southwest. We've been drier at times in western Texas. This has been a major concern in parts of Kansas, although lately we've been able to get some moisture in that area. The drought issues we talked about in pockets of the Mid-South, there's still a few places that are behind southern Florida, and you can also see this area right here in Virginia and North Carolina. I was just talking to a colleague out here, Clara, about recent precipitation, and she says a lot of the growers out there are loving the fact that some of the rains have gotten into this area. Now we look at those really wet regions here, getting into the larger Midwest area, and then, of course, down here coming into eastern Texas, all across the Gulf Coast. So I wanted to show you where this pattern's going according to the European model. Now, it was the European model that 8 days ago, so last Monday, was giving us this hint of a pattern break. And I went all after it because I hate to say it, but it was something I wanted, right? I wanted to see that, and so I let it rent a lot of room in my head. And then Tuesday last week, we threw it out. We said, no, there's a failure mode in this, and the failure mode was in that big Pacific high. And we returned troughs to the northwest. And now if you look over the next 2 weeks, from the European model on precipitation anomalies. We can start to see seasonal dryness in the west, but that's just because the storm trajectory is kind of coming in a bit more like this, with the subtropical component helping here. So our wetter conditions kind of tend to have this look to them, to the east of that line. But then you have a lot of growers in here who are patiently waiting to get in the field. We have such wet weather across the south. We've had crop type switching down here because we can't plant or go after the typical crops we normally do because of the wet weather, shifting our crop calendars around. And I got a lot of questions. I told you a lot of Iowans have been asking me about this, but I get it. I mean, take a look at how wet most of Iowa has been. The questions that come in, if we don't break in the next 7 days or 14 days, what does this mean in terms of our ability to get heat beyond this time period? So I made a couple of maps for us. Now, again, they're going to focus only on the Midwest. But looking back over the last 20 years, I just made an average temperature throughout the year. So daily average temperatures and really daily max and daily min. So I could calculate GDDs. I'm going to use the Corm formula, which is a max of 86 and a base of 50. And we're going to look at how many of these units we can accumulate. Now, if you're unfamiliar with this unit, it is basically just adding up heat units every day. That's one simple way of thinking about it. You take the average high temperature, the average low temperature for the day, add them together, divide by 2, and then subtract 50. And the number you get is the accumulation of a GDD. All right. Now, throughout a growing season, we want to hit, if you're growing corn in this area, I mean, Iowa and Illinois are the top 2 corn producers, so we'll pick on those 2 states. If you want to, choose the maturity level that you're used to, the general rule of thumb is we got to get about 24 to 2,500 GDDs. So, okay, after all of that, if we didn't plant until May 21st, and we expected a first frost on October 15, all right, how many GDDs would we be able to get on average? And these numbers, in parts of Iowa are in the 25 to 2,600 range, and across Illinois we go from about 2,600 at the northern part of the state all the way down to over 3,000 in the southern part of the state. So the question is if you're north of Iowa, now you're in Minnesota or you're in South Dakota or in Wisconsin, do you need to start thinking about a different variety? How far away from your GDD target is this, and how is this going to affect the relative maturity you're going to choose? And again, this assumes an October 15 frost date. We've had warm Octobers in the past. And like 2019 was an example. We ended up waiting late to get a first frost. But I then wanted to show a more extreme case. So that's if you get planted in the next week. What if you have to wait all the way, not just the next week, but the week following and then the week following that? What if we don't get in the ground until June 7th? And June 7th, if we zoom in here, this would be the typical number of GDDs you get by the time you get to October 15. And now these numbers across Iowa are, we're struggling to get past 2,100 across the northern counties. And if you kind of get up here in the Dakotas, now we're looking at, 1,700 to 2,400. That'd be the range going north to south across North and South Dakota. And so this becomes a real conversation we have to have, meaning that this forecast coming up, where was it? Not there. Here it is. It's just critical to know, are we able to get in when the windows open, even though they may be brief, and plant a crop? And are we going to have to plant in less than ideal conditions? So the answer to those questions comes down to understanding the pattern. And if you don't mind, I want to give you 3 model views of this today. The first is the GFS. This was the failure. We had seen more of that ridge living over the Northwest about a week ago to this point in the forecast. And it's just not there. So what ends up happening is with time, systems are kind of falling, or not falling, but kind of cascading over the northern side of this. And there they go. So by the end of this week, we're watching these troughs kind of sneak into the Northwest. And this ridge that had been here is now there. And that takes it back to a place where it had been, right? We've discussed this in many videos about that Pacific Ridge. Where are we in time? This is out there Sunday morning. As we work our way into next week, this look is that checkmark look, right? That western trough, southwest flow, some sort of ridging here. This opens the Gulf of Mexico. This produces storm systems. And this is the GFS ensemble forecast all the way out to next Tuesday, to Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. And anytime there are troughs of low pressure here, this just indicates, remember, it's always on their lead edge. That area is the area that has the best chance at having the wet weather. All right, let's just take it back. I don't know, let's go back to where that started, like that trough comes in. Here we go. How about this Friday? And I'm going to flip over to the European ensemble, and I want to see what it's doing. Does it produce the same look through Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday of next week? While not as deep, there is still troughing here. You can see that flow. And then going in toward next Thursday, Friday, Saturday, I mean, it's not got the same depth as the European, it's the GFS, but it is there. And lastly, let's take it back again about here, and I want to show the artificial intelligence. Now, this is not an ensemble blend. This is like a single model run, but it's using history as its teacher, not the dynamical models. And again, what do we see? There's a trough coming in behind. That's much deeper. Look at that. There's a broader southeast ridge or south ridge, and that would indicate that getting out here into this third week of May, I mean, this is looking at severe conditions in the midsection of the country for severe storms. And then, I'm out here now to the 25th, 26th, and the model's trying to block things up. To be honest, if I was in the central United States, we need this to block up, because what the case was in the other models was this ridge, which is the blocking factor here, was way over there, not stopping this trough from coming through. But if you push it north of there, the flow comes around like this, and there's some component to move the trough to the west, which means, unfortunately, that the northwest stays cool and inclement and cloud covered. And we have a trough off the east coast. But if you're in the midsection of the country, hooray, we'll break this and we'll have better chances. But where am I in time? This is May 27th. And we just have questions as to whether or not this is done after that. So that's where this analysis is heading. And to be honest, last week, even the European artificial intelligence didn't fully articulate this type of pattern continuing. It too broke away and thought there'd be more western U.S. ridging. So, yeah, that's a loss for me in terms of trying to predict this. All right, now you know what I'm dealing with, and let's get in and see what this all means. So this morning, just about 6 o'clock this morning, this is what we're dealing with, some dense fog. We had flood watches and warnings down here, severe thunderstorm and tornado watch going on right down here in this part of Florida. And if we just kind of take a look at the next several days here in terms of severe weather, this is today's SPC map, so the convective outlook map. Got a slight risk in Florida, but a broad area of thunderstorm development, as you can see here. Going into tomorrow, again, a lot throughout the plains, over here in the Carolinas, down in Florida for the risk of strong storms. And then day 3, we're going back to Texas. And then day 4, we're going to go down here to Louisiana, Mississippi. Day 4, right here, Louisiana, Mississippi. So the pattern is still going. Here is the high-res NAM. As we play this forward through the middle of the day today, there's our low that came out of Arizona, still spinning over, really anchored over the mid-south into Illinois. Rain is pushing up through parts of North Carolina, Virginia, again, one of our drier areas when you look back over the last 50 days or so. And there's a weak low that's sneaking right out here from Wyoming into South Dakota. And it's going to link up with a front that's still lingering from like Lake Winnipeg through, the Red River of the North, which of course drains into Lake Winnipeg. It drains to the north there. We just keep playing this forward. We are now 3 o'clock on Wednesday, playing through Wednesday evening. There's our risk of storms on Wednesday evening showing up in this region. And that low that was over Arizona is finally off the coast by the time we get to Thursday. So it took from Saturday to Thursday to get here. And playing this forward, this low that was born kind of out of Wyoming, linked up with the front that's stretched out of southern Manitoba, now lives here over Minnesota. And we can continue to see those showers and storms to the south of it. And anything, just any rain in this area is going to knock these guys out from getting our crop planted. So that's just your next 60 hours. If we take a look at our 5-model forecast, this is the new artificial intelligence update. This goes out again to May 20th. Important rains across the Canadian prairie. Yes, this is a delay in any sort of planting and spring field work, but wet weather in here is beating back last fall's drought. In the U.S., we're wettest along the Gulf Coast. You can see the wetter conditions up the East Coast, but again, this area right in through here continues to see storm systems coming through. This is the WPC forecast, same time frame. This is the National Blend of Models forecast, same time frame. So you do notice that in the middle, there's an area where it will rain, but it's not as wet as it will be to both the south and north of that area. Going forward, this is what the new European forecast looks like for the next 7 days. And I'll be honest with you, while we love looking at the European model and the GFS all throughout winter, these models being non-convection allowing, so in other words, convection is parameterized in them, it is meaning that we're going to become less and less satisfied with their predictions going forward. These models perform very well when there's deep troughs, strong fronts, and strong dynamics. When we get into thunderstorm season, summer, their ability to properly pick up on the pattern is going to start to fall apart. And that's why picking up on the actual pattern and what could drive thunderstorm behavior is going to be critical. So it looks a bit like a mess here, doesn't it? But this is just suggesting that the pattern, sending systems in like this, is going to be conducive to tossing up air and making showers and storms. And the GFS is in the same boat. All right, now let's get into some probabilities. 10 days, chance of an inch. Ohio Valley, Gulf Coast, getting over here right along Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia. This is this wettest corridor. But we're not dry here. And we're not dry here. There was not going to be just wide open windows of 10 days of nothing. We've got better than a 50 to 70% chance of getting an inch. If we look for those dry areas, and I bet a new model run just came in. Oh, it didn't. I beat it. Here you can see back across the west where the driest area is going to be. So that's what I've got. That is how we kind of piece this together. Let's go ahead and look at the models, though. GFS left, European right. We've already watched in the high-res NAM1 system exit east. There's the weaker frontal boundary moving through by 7 o'clock. The storms to the south. This, again, is going to be on Thursday, getting into Friday across the Gulf Coast. But a broader area of wetter weather here as the next trough sinks across this part of the Canadian prairie. So, again, this is Friday afternoon and evening. And then as we work our way into Sunday and Monday, again, the potential for just dragging another weak frontal boundary in through here. It's not in the GFS, but we do see it in the European, and it's just the chances for rain trying to come through. We then work our way into Monday and Tuesday of next week, and again, there's disturbances coming out of the northwest, and that's why this area starts to see another chance of getting some moisture. The timing's a bit different in the GFS versus the European, but the idea here is that there's stuff coming through. And that gets us out to next Wednesday, and you already see at the beginning of this that that's only to here. That trough comes out next Thursday, Friday, and there's one following it, Saturday into Sunday. And that's when the pattern maybe gets amplified enough to give us a bit of a break. But again, that's after May 25th, 26th into the 27th that happens for the midsection of the country. The Northwest and the Northeast continue to deal with troughs at that point. All right, so where do we take this? Into week 2, here's our 3-model update. And there's much better agreement now than there had been in the past, with the GFS, which is here, outperforming the European model. Now, I put it next to the European model, but I think they're now in better alignment than they were in the past. And I do want to point out that the CPC yesterday said on May 21st to the 25th, this is an area where there's just a slight risk, but there is a slight risk for heavy precipitation. And if you want to know why, it's because of this trough right here. So that trough, that's where it's expected to be on the 23rd. So this slight ridging, this is an opening of the Gulf of Mexico. That trough comes through and lifts that air and produces the risk of the heavy precipitation. So let's get away from it and talk about temperatures. This is actually something I'm not worried about. You know, the frost potential over the next 7 days, it is not uncommon in late May to have the frost in the UP in northern Wisconsin and here in this part of the arrowhead of Minnesota. But as we look at our high temperatures, here's today's highs. Getting into Wednesday and Thursday, some heat coming into the west. But as we get out there, there's Friday and Saturday. There's that cold air moving through the northwest, well, colder air moving through the northwest. We're going to get up into the 90s in the plains by Saturday. Working our way into Sunday, our risk of excessive heat is largely going to be in southern Texas, where we will get up above 100 degrees. But you're looking at a 40-plus degree swing in temperature from north to south in the central plains of the United States, which isn't uncommon, but it just kind of shows you where the contrast is going to be. And I think you know what I'm going to say next. If you keep it cool here and hot here, in the middle, it's windy. And so we have to consider what that could mean. And as I mentioned, dropping troughs in the west, we cool things back off here soon enough. And stretching it out a bit further, Well, first of all, here is the next 7 days of GDDs, what we're expecting to accumulate. And then if you go forward, day 5 through 10, that's the western troughs coming back in. Day 10 through 15, they move east. And that's well represented in the European model as well. That's day 5 through 10, and this is moving through day 10 through 15. So some cooler air in the Canadian Prairie, the cooler air in the northern plains. I said cooler, not cold. This isn't brutal cold that's going to snap a frost into this area. I don't have evidence of that coming through. So just want to be clear there. Now, I wasn't ready to start to do this yet, but I now need to show you this part of Mexico. Because yesterday, if you kind of look at it, there were some very, very interesting things. Take a look at all of the haze and smoke in here. Now, this is sun glint. This is haze and smoke. And what's important about this is that that's an indicator of a source of dry air that's in the Bay of Campeche or coming off the Yucatan or in Mexico that we've talked about it for months, is a concern of mine as a potential feature that could migrate north. But it's the convection down here. Here's the Tejano Pass. And this convection is possibly going to initiate some low pressure development here. And that is why, for the first time this year, I'm now showing you in the Pacific that there's a 30% chance of tropical development coming out of the Gulf of, let's say it, so you can say it properly, Tehuantepec. Tehuantepec, I think is how you say it. That's right in through here. So let's watch this. First, kind of hint at some tropical activity. It's in the Pacific, but something we got to be watching. Okay, back to North America. I'd like to show you a model trend. You know I've been disappointed in the European weeklies, but if they start staying consistent with a forecast, we can't ignore it. So I'm going to take you back to the 9th. This would be last Thursday, and this was its forecast from May 21st to June 21st. Now, as I go forward, this was its forecast on the 10th. And just watch the map. Watch your area in the map. This is the forecast on the 11th. This is the forecast on the 12th. And this is the forecast from yesterday. It's always the same time period. And what I noticed is, in this area, during that time period, we got wetter and wetter and wetter in each new forecast. While I am skeptical, I'm not going to ignore it. And I want you to be watching this trend with me as we go forward. Beyond that, I want to talk a bit about ocean temperatures. This is the latest I've got from NOAA. There is our loss of El Nino, the surfacing of the cool water, the beginning of what could be a weak La Nina. And I've gone over this again and again, but you've got to watch this warm water. This is our negative PMM signal, PMM, Pacific Meridional Mode. I have a difficult time writing with my finger here. And yesterday we covered the PDO, which is the whole system of cooler water here with warmer water sneaking in. That's the negative phase of the PDO. Now what I want to know, I really want to know this, is that warm water going to bridge this gap, filling all of this in and leaving this down here cold while La Nina develops and we have a warm Atlantic. And you know the reason I'm looking after that is because of what happened in 2020. This is already taking place in 2020. But by the time we got to July 2020, look at this. Signs of weak La Nina, cooler here. That warm water made the advance. And then we got into a very active hurricane season out of this pattern. I want to know if that's going to occur because I've made this case that I'm mostly concerned now about large southwest ridging. And so if you look, June through September 15th of 2020, we had storms that just ran over the top of this. There were pockets, regional pockets of drought, but that's the way the pattern shaped up through mid-September. And it's still just an analog I'm thinking about as we go forward. Now, how strong is this particular La Nina going to be? I'm going to pull up something real quick here before we finish these slides. If we go to the Bureau of Meteorology's webpage, the Bureau of Meteorology is out of Australia. I show you this every once in a while. This is their forecast for ocean temperatures. This should show up here in a second. There it is. They are the least aggressive. They're actually calling for almost perfectly ISO-neutral conditions, and they're the outlier. You see, we have Australia, Canada, the European model. This is the Japanese, the French, the United States, and the British. From June to July into August and September, all of these other modeling centers are going after weak negative or weak La Nina conditions. And by October, 3 of the models, the Canadians, the British, and the US, are into La Nina. But the French and the Australians are really calling for INSO neutral to stick around. Big questions to be answered about this. This is why I'm thinking hard about 2020. That's kind of what happened. It didn't go full-blown La Nina. So we need to talk. They did the next year, but that's not what we're talking about here. So let's continue to monitor this carefully. Okay, to finish this up, I want to show you a quick animation where we compare the newest National Multi-Model Ensemble forecast for summer on precipitation and the newest ECMWF to the older. So as I go back to the older, take a look. Let's pause this. Right here. I made a video of this for a report. I want you to notice in the NMME, which backed off a bit on the strength of La Nina, that this whole area that it had been projecting drier in the old forecast now looks like this. And that's a trend that I think is important to monitor. Now, we will be getting new long-range data coming out from the other forecasting models, I think by the end of this week, if not early next week, and we'll be sure to, excuse me, talk about that. Okay, let's finish this up now. Quick global update. We're going to focus on Asia. I highlighted a few of the areas that we've lately been talking about, but this is a 30-day precipitation anomaly figure. And you can now see those regions like the flooding south of the Yangtze, the drier conditions we've had in the southern Russian wheat belt. I also want to take you to South America and again show you just how much rain over the last 30 days has hit from Paraguay into Rio Grande do Sul. Again, we have several places here on satellite-based radar estimates that are pushing 400 to 600 millimeters of rainfall, an absolute deluge of rain. If we look at the forecast coming up, it's hitting the same area in South America. So through the next 7 days, still wet into this area. How much? Another couple of inches. And then the models are putting out beyond that, day 7 through 10, in parts of Rio Grande do Sul, another 4 to 6 inches, maybe even more. So that flooding problem doesn't seem to be going away. Temperature-wise, got colder advancing through Argentina, and that's just it. The front is right there, right on the boundary, and that's where the heavy rain continues to fall. We're drier north, extremely wet south. Still cold throughout a big section of the Russian wheat belt here. That's going to continue to be a story of importance as well because it's drier in that area as well. Outside of that, take a look at the global map on other regions we've been discussing. But with this map, I'll stop. Tell you all have a great day, and I look forward to talking to you tomorrow morning. Thanks.